person who's exposed to violence, even if you are not the one who is hit physically, if you're very young, that affects how your brain gets wired. If you are in a nurturing, loving household, you view the world in a positive, nurturing, loving way. If you are in a household that is filled with violence and violent behavior, then you're wired to think that's normal. People who act out negatively in society, for the most part, are people who are exposed to violence early on. The single best way to stop this chain of violence is to get in early. If you can do that, you can change social outcomes. You can reduce crime. You can reduce teen pregnancy, drug abuse, child abuse, welfare dependency, homelessness, all of the things that we're trying to attack and focus in on. This is the time in life where the window of opportunity is the greatest.
Where are the kids you see every day? Where are the kids you see at the grocery store?
And walking down the street. We're your neighbors, but we're more than that.
Genetically, we are pretty much the same as you.
What differentiates us between somebody who wants to act out against society violently or somebody who wants to be a positive part of society? It's all this, and it's all what's put in here.
When a child is exposed to violence, the changes in their brain are not related as much to being hit themselves as to the sense of fear. I realized that there had to be something different about the brains of these kids than kids who hadn't had those experiences. We started to get images of children who had been exposed to various traumatic experiences or violence and compare those to children who hadn't had that.
What the PET scan measures is different in kids who have been exposed to violence than in kids who have not. The implications of that are profound. We're seeing actual physiologic, biochemical changes, structural changes within the brain.
So that a child, in fact, can literally just witness violence. They can see their parents fighting, or they are in an environment in the community where there's just pervasive violence and threat. They're going to continually activate this system on again and again and again. And the more it's on, the more you'll have fear-related changes in the brain of this child.
1 in 4 of us in California is exposed to violence, so the problem is bigger than you think.
Quite often, kids who've been exposed to some type of violence have a lot of behavioral problems. On one side, aggressive, defiant types of problems. The other side are mental health symptoms like depression and anxiety.
Exposure to violence doesn't have just one pathway. There are multiple pathways out of a violent childhood. The vast majority of kids exposed to violence of various sorts, they do okay. But the cost of doing okay is tremendous. There's tremendous personal cost to that. It takes more energy and effort for them to do what most of us take for granted.
If you're a baby from a day old, month old, year old, toddler, the atmosphere and the environment that you're raised in has a profound effect on how your brain will organize and determine how you're going to behave later on in life.
At the time in our lives when science shows our brain is developing the most, we are being exposed to more and more violence.
The fabric of our society is fraying. The number of us in foster care has tripled in the last 15 years. California has more young people incarcerated than any other state in the country.
We need to work in partnership, active partnerships with a myriad of agencies, that we need to have this safety net so none of our kids fall through these gaps.
That's what Safe from the Start is promoting, is to work across disciplines so that law enforcement is reaching out to the education community, is reaching out to the healthcare community, and working hand in hand. We want to limit a child's exposure to violence.
When we are abused or neglected, we are 59% more likely to be arrested for a juvenile crime.
You can change that.
And we are 28% more likely to be arrested as an adult.
You can change that too.
Part of it is just sitting at the table, getting these players together at the table and saying, here are some of our major issues. How can we each contribute? Let's start working smarter and working together. Let's pool our collective knowledge and our experiences and our resources, and let's work toward that common goal that we have identified.
It's not uncommon for many of these families to already be receiving services, but they're not coordinated services, and they're not all being brought together for the same purpose and the same reason.
We need to look at treating the child in the context of the community, the school, the neighborhood, the family, the parent relationship, and the child itself. The only way we can respond to all those levels is if we have an integrated, comprehensive approach.
If law enforcement and social services and programs like mine all were to collaborate on services provided for this family, we would be able to reduce the overall cost to all of society for what we are attempting to do.
We have to decrease the competition between people who want funding only for early childhood and people who want funding only for adolescent substance abuse and people who want funding only for community redevelopment programs. And the fact is, we need all of that stuff.
If everybody does something, it all adds up. What can you do today to make a change?
This is easy for a law enforcement officer to do, because we're not asking the law enforcement officer to do the therapy or to be the social worker. All we're saying is recognize the injury. Recognize that these children are suffering from injury. Recognize who they are and help connect them to professionals who will do the therapy, who will do the treatment.
As a domestic violence advocate, I see that we all have a responsibility to remain focused not only on the primary victim, which we often assume is the woman, but also the children, and realizing that the children, unless there's early intervention, that they're going to be that much more likely to become victims or perpetrators themselves.
As a social worker, we have a chance to really impact families. We have a chance to make a difference, and I have a chance to help make that child grow in a healthy, safe environment. And what I provide to the family, whether it be resources, whether it be services, whether it be connecting them with someplace to get what they need, that's my opportunity to make a difference for that child and that family.
There are many faith communities that operate preschools and child care centers where the best science that's been developed on early brain research can be applied to make a difference in creating that nurturing, healthy environment that is so important for child development.
Educators today have a myriad of problems that they need to be ready to deal with. It's not just classroom, it's not just a learning theory, it's not just the curriculum and how I teach it. It's now the recognition issue, recognition of violence issues in kids, recognition of withdrawal in kids or depression in kids. So there's a myriad of emotional, mental health issues that teachers need to be aware of.
The role of a person in the media is we have to right some of the wrongs, and we have a powerful tool at our disposal. And that means that we need to present the information in a succinct, understandable fashion that parents can get the message that everything you do with or to your child will surface at some point, someday.
We see children from birth on, and we see families from birth on, and we see them come into our offices, we see them interact, we get a sense for what's happening. I would like pediatricians to be seen as a very important resource in that fight for kids.
It's just like a spider web. A bug lands on that spider web, and instantly the whole system reverberates, and that spider knows exactly where that bug is. Well, a child's not a bug, but what we want is a system like a spider web, where a child hits the system and everybody knows. Everybody that's relevant in terms of meeting specific needs, it's instantly activated for a child.
Our brains grow the most from the time we are born until we are about 6. I was born with 15 trillion brain connections.
When I was a year old, I had 1,000 trillion.
By the time I am 6, I'll know more than 10,000 words. But as we get older, the window of opportunity begins to close.
We're talking about how we as a society are going to succeed, how we're going to carry on. We're talking about this issue of passing the torch on. And to be frank, as adults, we have not been very good at passing the torch to the younger generations.
It's not like dressing an injury. You don't see the result right away, but it does happen over time. Science tells us that. Science has proven that it does take effect over time.
If you are loved, taken care of, read to, talked to, played with, sung to, held, all of these things, these are the things that lay down a positive experience and that will ultimately affect how you're going to relate to members of society.
It's in the home where society's roots are, and if we make home life a better place, all of society will benefit.
Every community needs to be aware and to confront the reality of violence in our society today.
Get involved with issues around children on a national level, or find something in your community. Make certain that laws, regulations, and other legislative and governmental activities take into account the needs of children.
We get so caught up in our own work and our meetings and our policies, and we don't take the time, not enough time, to listen to the children.
When you work with kids that are exposed to violence and you run up against these bureaucratic problems time after time after time, it's so easy to quit. It's so easy to retreat back into your own comfortable job, your own comfortable life, and say, you know what, that's them. Don't do that. Don't quit. Make the phone calls, go out of your way to try to find out what's happening in your community, look for resources, don't stop.
Science shows that exposure to violence can be tragic for kids,
especially young ones.
Remember, we're only 20% of the population, but we're 100% of the future.
Reducing our exposure to violence is everybody's job,
especially yours.
I sat in that desk that a lot of these kids sat in. I sat with issues of anger. And it was a teacher who made a difference to me. It was my 6th grade teacher, Mrs. West, who saw, teachers and adults might think it's corny, but she truly saw potential in me, and I could tell that. And that changed my life around.
When I was a young person in our neighborhood in Harlem, New York, people did watch out for you. And they told on you. And once or twice I did come home from school and had my mother say, you know, what were you doing in that particular part of town when you were supposed to be in school? And I'm wondering, how did she find that out? So I think it's possible to form communities that allow that kind of adult-child interaction, that allow that kind of cohesiveness, that kind of community caring.